Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are. So, as Miroslav has introduced, my name is Daniel Wang. I'm presently the chair of the Climate Risk Steering Group at the IAIS. Very pleased to be here today, and thank you for joining us today. As you can see on the screen before you, the IAIS has just rolled out our first public consultation on climate risk supervisory guidance. And between Hannah and myself, we are here to briefly introduce the work of the IAIS when it comes to climate risk management, but also to say a few words and to introduce the consultation paper. If we can begin, please. Next slide. So this is the brief agenda of what I'm going to share in the next couple of slides. So just to remind everyone, next slide. For those who are not as familiar with the IAIS, so the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, our mission here comprises this 200 jurisdictions. And I myself am from Singapore and from the Monetary Authority of Singapore. So we, together with my fellow insurance supervisors, we contribute to the work of the IAIS, especially in setting global insurance standards. And the two bullets that you see before you are the reasons why the IAIS exists. So this is the primary mission and goals and objectives of the IAIS. So more specifically on the climate risk work, you can skip 2 slides. So over in the recent few years, we have achieved a broad consensus, I guess, both through scientists, policymakers, politicians, certainly industry players, and many other stakeholders, that climate change can be a source of financial risk that impacts insurers, both in their role as on both sides of their balance sheet, as an underwriter and as an investor. So at the IAIS, our work for the last few years has been focused on equipping insurance supervisors to heighten their focus on the transition and physical risks that can impact the global insurance sector, and to ensure that ultimately the insurers can put in place relevant measures and take appropriate actions to respond to this new source of risk. Next. So back in September 2021, the Climate Risk Steering Group was formed. This is, as the name suggests, right, it's a steering group, is to coordinate the overall IAIS strategy and action plans to address climate-related risks, and we focus on these goals here. So number one is to undertake an analysis to understand how climate change impacts the global insurance sector, and fundamentally how it can provide a transmission channel to create financial instability. And the relevant measures and recommendations we can do as insurance supervisors working with the insurance stakeholders to deal with this risk. Second is to promote a globally consistent supervisory response, as I've already mentioned, to climate change. This includes a whole slew of different activities, which I will go to describe later, but it's primarily to develop guidance on supervisory practices. We are reviewing existing IAIS standards to see whether further work, further guidance is necessary. And definitely as well, because this is not just an insurance sector issue, it's a financial sector-wide issue. So where there's relevant cross-sectoral initiatives with the same objectives, IAIS fully intends to participate and support our peers in this. Thirdly is, and I think perhaps most importantly, is to help in capacity building initiatives with relevant partners to build up knowledge of climate risks, how to combat them, how to deal with them, and for the initiatives that will be rolled out in the months and years to come to make sure that everyone is up to speed on what needs to be done. Next slide. So these are the previous publications that the IAIS, either on a standalone basis or with other partners, have published in terms of climate risk related work and issues. This by no means will be the end. In fact, everyone here, you can fully expect more of such documents in the coming 2 or 3 years. Next. So this gets to the heart of what IAIS is trying to do, climate risk in the very near term. So in our 2023-2024 roadmap, here are the sort of key points of the climate risk related initiatives. So we have already done a gap analysis of the insurance core principles, and we fully expect to be proposing, and then eventually, after hearing everyone's feedback, to make relevant, small, but necessary updates to some parts of the ICP guidance material, and to also develop supporting material to make it explicit that insurance supervisors should in turn require insurers to incorporate climate-related risks into their governance and their operations. So as part of that, we expect to introduce in the next 18 or so months 3 different sets of consultation papers to gather feedback from stakeholders like yourself on the draft materials that we'll be producing and we will be proposing. So today's issuance of the first consultation paper really is the first installment on this plan. Secondly, as part of the climate scenario work, we have been working quite hard to produce practical capacity building materials for insurance supervisors. And in fact, we've conducted our own capacity building sessions for, in fact, multiple ones of a number of it, where a number of insurance supervisors have participated in. And this material, in turn, now being consolidated into more specific training material, and to the extent that climate scenario analysis, its design, its work, its considerations, and how to use them properly, it's evolving. We will continue to, we will be exploring how to put that out, and it's very likely that the second consultation paper will be quite heavy on the scenario analysis type material. Meanwhile, the third limb, we have been collecting data from stakeholders as part of the IAIS's annual global monitoring exercise that relates to climate-related risks. And we continue to fine-tune the indicators, those that are less relevant and more difficult to obtain because of certain nascency in the data. We will make adjustments along the way. So it will be an iterative process to identify the relevant indicators to better capture climate-related risks. It is my hope that what is the template that comes under the annual GME can over time provide some kind of global baseline in terms of understanding what appropriate data to collect and to analyze when it comes to monitoring climate-related risks. Finally, and just as importantly, we will continue to bring the insurance sector supervisory perspective to the climate-related work of the Financial Stability Board and relevant bodies that are clearly been very active in the climate risk space. This will include, for instance, the NGFS. So we will push on all these fronts as part of the 2023-24 roadmap. So this brings me to the end of the very short introduction of what the IAIS is doing in this front. I'll pass the time to Hannah, who will briefly take you through the current consultation paper.
Yes, thank you very much, Daniel, for this introduction, and I'm Also from my side, welcome everyone to this webinar, and thank you for your interest in this topic. I will go through the consultation document itself in a bit more detail to explain what the focus is of the consultation, and notably highlight what are the areas where we are hoping to get your feedback on in response to this consultation. So let me first, we go to the next slide. Let me first build a little bit upon what Daniel was mentioning around the fact that this is only the starting point of a journey. So we plan to publish 3 different consultations over the next 1.5 years, and here they are listed in the slide. So this one is part 1. We published it 2 weeks ago, and the public consultation is open until mid-May, specifically until 16 May. And the next part will be published by the end of this year. And the third part will be published early next year, so in the first quarter of 2024. I'll not go into detail on the content of this part because that's I will go into detail after this slide. But around part 2, that will include mainly supporting material. So what we mean with supporting material is materials that provide guidance and examples and recommendations around how the ICPs can actually be implemented. So that's application paper material, for those of you who are more familiar with the terminology. And that will cover the topics that you can see here on the slide. So firstly, market conduct. So that is ICP 19, ICP 21, which is around possible relevance for financial crime issues and greenwashing. And it will also cover climate scenario analysis, which is related to both insurers' own climate scenario analysis, but also notably the climate scenario analysis being done by supervisors in a top-down manner. So that is related to ICP 16, which is enterprise risk management for solvency purposes, and ICP 24, which is related to macroprudential supervision. So scenario analysis really as a macroprudential tool for supervisors to get a better understanding of how to actually conduct a specific type of scenario analysis, and also to provide examples across the globe of supervisors who have already conducted these type of analyses. Then the last part, the third part that will be published next year, will include certain limited changes to guidance of ICPs 15, which is around investments and investment policies, and 16, which is, as I just mentioned, more around ERM. So that deals with things like the ORSA, liquidity risk management, etc. And it will also include further supporting material covering a number of topics that you can see here on the slide. I won't list each and every one of them verbatim, but it's related to issues again around ERM, macroprudential supervision, to the extent it is not already covered by the climate scenario analysis. So for instance, around data collection, disclosures as well, and issues around valuation, which is also very important in this respect. So more to come in the next couple of months and year. And let me go to the next slide to go into more detail around this specific consultation. So the outline of the consultation document is as follows. So first of all, it gives a little bit of an insight into why climate change matters for insurance supervision and therefore for insurers. What is the rationale and the objective that the IAIS has with these sets of consultations, explaining that it both builds upon the work that we've already done, but also expands it to address certain topics that we haven't yet covered in the past. For instance, market conduct is such a topic where we haven't yet produced any work or reports on, so that's a new element that is added to our work. And we deliberately chose to not wait and only publish something next year, one big package. We deliberately chose a staggered approach with 3 different packages, so that we can also get feedback along the process from stakeholders, and it's also a way to show the different progress as we make progress. So what is the actual consultation part of the document, which is of course the most relevant part of today's session as well. So there are 3 main elements. So one is around the ICP introduction, the other is around governance, And the third one is a general part. So on the ICP introduction, as some of you may know, in the ICP introduction is the kind of preamble, so to say, of all the insurance core principles. And it sets out how the insurance core principles should be interpreted, how they should be read, and it sets out also certain general principles around aspects like proportionality, risk-based supervision, etc. And we are proposing to include 2 new paragraphs to the ICP introduction, which refer to the interconnectedness of risks, and in particular, as an example, also refer to climate-related risks. And we are asking for your feedback on that new proposed text. And then finally, secondly, we refer to the work that the IAIS has already done related to governance and internal controls. As some of you may know, the application paper that we published in May 2021 that already covered these issues around governance and internal controls. And we have reviewed those again, and we as IAIS have concluded that these guidance is still relevant also as per today, but we are asking feedback from you to hear if there's any further work that might be helpful and might support insurers and insurance supervisors in their in how they address these issues. We also, for information, share a comparison of the IAIS work that was published in 2021 and the Basel Committee's work that was published last year in June. And finally, we have a kind of catch-all question type of questions at the end of the consultation, where we're seeking feedback more generally on what type of issues the IAIS should focus on, and other questions around what might be missing in our work plan. We have a targeted question also on possible work on transition planning. So all of this is accessible on the IAIS website under the consultation page. And as I mentioned before, the consultation page will remain open until 16 May. If we then move to the next slide, here you can again see the actual questions that we have posed, and I will not read them all one for one. I have already highlighted them. So we have two questions on the ICP introduction, then a question on the governance section, and a few more general questions. And we are happy to receive your comments on each of these questions, or just one response. That's also possible. With that, I think we can move to the final part of this webinar, which is hearing from you in terms of if you have any questions on the material that we presented, or any questions on the specific consultation document. As mentioned by Miroslav, you can simply pose your questions via the Q&A, and then we will make sure to respond to them. I will hand back to Miroslav now to manage the Q&A session.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Daniel, for your presentations. As Hannah mentioned, please send your questions. Just wait a few minutes to get some of your questions. We have a question now. To what extent do you think the IAIS can play a role in exploring opportunities related to climate change and encouraging insurers to support mitigating, adapting measures by policyholders, and facilitating private-public partnerships programs related to climate change?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, if I can tackle that. So, Gabor, I think you hit all the 3 key areas that matters when it comes to the role the insurance sector can play towards climate change. So maybe give you a bit of context. So clearly, as insurance supervisors within a body of insurance supervisors at the IAIS, our first and foremost objective is to protect policyholders and to bring about financial stability, right? So the risk dimension is clearly something that is vital importance to insurance supervisors. So I think your part A is precisely, as you've noticed, why there has been a more recent focus on part A. For B and C, I think they are quite important, but it remains to see what is the exact role that insurance supervisors can play in these areas. I do believe personally that there is a role, and in fact, I will welcome if stakeholders here on this call and elsewhere to provide suggestions on what role you yourself see as your supervisor in your home jurisdiction or at the IAIS level can contribute towards B and C. And it's important that we can then have a collective discussion and bring about consensus on B and C as well. Is there a next question?
Thanks, Daniel. Next question, will there be a public hearing after the consultation?
Perhaps, Hannah, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure, of course. So yes, so as part of the IAIS processes, we always, when we launch a public consultation, we organize such a session like today. And then we always do that also at the end of the process to give insight into how the material has changed based on the feedback received. So we'll definitely have further engagements on this in the future.
The next question is just to kind of clarify what will be kind of updating in terms of ICP guidance and supporting material. Just basically clarify what is in scope in terms of ICP guidance and what is in scope in terms of supporting material.
Just to make sure I understand the question, because on my screen it's sort of chopped up. Can you repeat the question, Miroslav?
So I think it's just more to clarify in terms of the updates we're undertaking in the moment, what will cover ICP guidance and what will cover supporting material, which ICP will be in the scope of update of the guidance and which one will be in the scope of developing supporting material.
Okay, so as Hannah and I have introduced in the deck, and anyway, just to reiterate, this deck of slides is already publicly available on the IAIS website. You will see in that slide that Hannah covered. There will be 3 consultations, part 1, part 2, and part 3. So collectively, they will cover either additional ICP guidance of relevant ICPs, but in different batches. We specifically mentioned which ICPs they are. Yeah, I think Miroslav is helping with this. So yeah, there you go. So I hope this answers your question, and you can refer to the deck of slides later as well.
Thank you, Daniel. Next question regarding transitional planning. Is it going to be insurance sector specific or horizontal? I'm not exactly sure what is meant here, horizontal. Daniel?
So, Mirko, I assume you mean by horizontal, you mean should it be financial sector wide versus just focusing on the insurance sector? So, I think it will have to be both actually, because there will be, to the extent that financial institutions can play a role to help the rest of the real economy, to help them transition, then there are certain characteristics and considerations that are common whether you're a bank, an asset manager, or an insurer. But at the same time, just take an insurer for example, right? Because through your underwriting process, and on your ability to take on long-term liabilities, especially if you're a life insurer, there are certain ways where you can help the transition process, both on your asset side as well as on your liability side. That will be quite different from a more traditional bank. So there are some parts that may have to be customized and catered towards on a sector-specific basis.
Thank you, Daniel. Next question. What's the timeline for addressing climate risk impact on availability and affordability of insurance and dislocation impacts?
Sorry, this question comes from who? I'm trying to find the actual question.
It is from Bernie Birnbaum. Sorry for my pronunciation. So just repeat, what is the timeline for addressing climate risk impact on availability and affordability of insurance and dislocation impacts?
So I'm trying to understand what is meant by timeline. Could the person asking the question, will you be able to elaborate on your question a bit? By unmuting yourself.
I don't think that that's an option, unfortunately, Daniel. But shall we move on to the next question? And
I thought they might be referring to our protection caps work. Perhaps Bernie, you could confirm if that was indeed the case. In the meantime, we can go to another question, perhaps. Thank you.
Okay. Next question. It's again about the current plans. Can you please repeat the plan for addressing market conduct issues of climate risk?
Yeah, so for market conduct issues, there are quite a few. I suppose this will largely be addressed in part 3, right, Hannah?
It's part 2, actually.
Oh, it's part 2. Okay, so this will include, what is the role of the insurance supervisor and what kind of guidance to give to an insurer when it relates to, say, issues on greenwashing in terms of marketing and selling a product. So I think these will be covered in part 2.
Thank you, Daniel. Next question. Are consultancies allowed to respond to the consultation paper?
Hannah, you want to take that?
Yes, so everyone is allowed to respond. So it's an open consultation, and we appreciate comments from anyone who has an interest in this topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. Next question. Will the IAIS take into account other standards, such as TCFD, ISSB, that some insurers may be preparing for in parallel? There may be areas in risk and disclosures where the work undertaken overlaps.
So the short answer is very much so. So especially when it comes to climate disclosures and reporting, within the IAIS, we will take stock of what for instance, the ISSB will be finalizing and introducing, and we will do our part to make sure that there is broader, hopefully global alignment when it comes to such disclosures.
Thank you, Daniel. Next question, again related to market conduct. What issues will IAIS consider when looking at market conduct from climate-related risk perspective?
Yeah, so the most obvious one would be greenwashing, and whether certain types of insurance products, where there is a ESG team or it's a environment climate risk related team, what are the supervisory expectations when it comes to preventing greenwashing? So that's a clear example where I think we do need a coordinated baseline approach.
Thank you, Daniel. Next question. Transition will differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. To what extent can flexibility be discussed?
So it's true, yeah. So, but in a way, if you take a step back, right? Many countries have committed to in their NDCs to meet the Paris-aligned targets. So that, and of course, there will be some jurisdictions that are will need a longer time to get there. So to the extent where 2050, 1.5 degrees and so on is part of the NDC submitted and committed to by that jurisdiction, there's already a group of very important jurisdictions that are making commitments towards that target. So of course, every economy is different, large, small, complexity, and so on and so forth. So at the national level, I'm sure over time there will be national level coordination, right, between the financial sector and the real economy, and various policy measures that will be introduced to nudge players and stakeholders towards that national commitment. So from an IAIS insurance supervisor point of view, to the extent that we are part of that national jurisdiction, I'm sure insurance supervisors will have to play their role. But at the IAIS level, that is precisely why we are posing a question in this current consultation paper. At the macro IAIS level, is there a further role that IAIS needs to bring to bear towards helping to facilitate and contribute to this transition process? So for instance, many financial institutions, including some insurers, are introducing transition plans. So can the supervisor play any role in these transition plans that is being put out by the financial institution? Why and why not, and the considerations thereof? So happy to hear everyone's feedback on such things. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Next question is similar to net transition. It is about the plans of the current view on the role of supervisors in overseeing insurers' net zero transition commitments and plans. And do you recognize the need for robust industry-wide standards and their enforcement via supervision?
So on that, of course, personally, I'm very glad that the NZIA has taken the initiative and done this much work under the broader umbrella of the GFANS in this area. And I would say that as supervisors, we are definitely supportive. But if your question is about exactly what role the supervisor should come in to either endorse, approve, or amend some of these transition plans, this is something that still has to be, we have to find consensus on and to deliberate further. And I do hope that you can give feedback on that as well, as I've already mentioned.
Actually, there's another question very similar to that. So please add anything if you feel it is necessary. Does the IAIS see a role to ensure harmonized supervision of transition plans and targets, as they have an impact on transition risk exposure and policyholders? Please add anything if there's anything you haven't mentioned so far.
Yeah, I will come back to the previous responses I've given. I think there will be a role, but exactly what that role is and will still need to be discussed and deliberated upon.
Okay. So just to clarify the question. So the question was about the protection gap work and the timeline. So I guess, Andy, if you can comment on that. And also there is kind of additional question, protection gap, is to what extent that work will be incorporated into the climate risk worker consultations.
Daniel, if you wish, I could answer this question related to protection gaps, share a bit about the task force.
Yes, please.
So, so we set up a new task force to deal with issues around initially net cat protection gaps. So this task force is called the Protection Gaps Task Force, and it was established a few months ago, earlier this year, and it has the aim to, by the end of this year, issue a report, a public report that identifies both challenges and opportunities related to the the addressing of protection gaps, what the role of supervisors should be in this, how supervisors can respond to it, and how supervisors might be able to help support multi-stakeholder approaches and solutions to this. So the work has really just started, and we have planned quite some further information exchange across the year to hear from various stakeholders who are also working on this in this area, and partly also in the global seminar in June that we are organizing in Seattle. There will be several sessions around this work, and by the end of this year we will have the public report ready. That's really at this stage like an exploratory work. And I think there was a second or a related questions around how this then relates to our work on the climate risk front. So we have set up these specific groups separately. So we have a group on climate risk that takes forward the work that we are presenting today, and then we set up a separate group to really have dedicated resources to work on the protection gaps issues. But obviously, there are some interlinkages, both in the problems that we're discussing, but also the solutions that we're discussing and the role of supervisors. So within IAIS, there's a lot of contact between the members and the Secretary of Staff of these groups. And to the extent this can feed into each other's works, we will definitely do so. Especially, for instance, if you talk about issues around accessibility, affordability, that is also a market conduct issue. So we will make sure that in whatever we do on the market conduct side in this particular project is aligned with what is developed on the protection gap task force. And but I would say that there will be other opportunities for discussion on that particular topic, both in June at the global seminar, but also later in the year.
Thanks, Hannah. And the last question at this stage is a basic question asking for more specifics about what the consultations may cover with regards to ICP 14 evaluation and ICP 20 public disclosure, to what extent we can kind of discuss the future direction of what this further consultation material may cover.
Yeah, I can take that. On ICP 14, I expect that at least at this stage, the any changes will be quite limited for various reasons, because firstly, and most importantly, ICP 14 is already quite broad. It's meant to cover, from a capital or valuation perspective, cover, it as written, it really covers all risks, including potentially climate risk. Then on a more practical front, the capital type issues, especially Pillar 1 type issues, we all know that there is insufficient data to really make substantive changes to cater to capital requirements or valuation practices specific to climate risk. So I think at this stage, I do not expect significant changes to ICP 14, but of course, this remains an evolving debate. On ICP 20, or more broadly, sustainability-related disclosures, or broadly what we'll call Pillar 3, this will be what the IASSB will introduce, hopefully in the next couple of months when they finalize their work, will be quite a game changer, I think, where at the national level, we can expect that we can likely expect many, especially the more advanced and ready jurisdictions, to align or even mandate sustainability-related disclosures in line with what the IASSB will come up with. And then, as I already mentioned, when the IASSB makes those documentation final, we at IAIS will also have to consequently review ICP 20 and to see to what extent any changes may be needed to make some of the guidance surrounding ICP 20 take into account what the IASSB and more broadly climate change and what new things we may have to introduce.
Thank you, Danny. One more question. Does IAIS envisage amending conference rules?
At this stage, I would say it's quite premature to talk about that, unless you have a specific area about which particular conference rules you are thinking about. Do you want to sort of add on to the chat?
If a chance, there's actually a new question in the meantime. You mentioned that the lack of data on climate-related financial risk, but is there not also an issue with the current framework relying on historical data in this area? Are you also assessing different precautionary approaches to avoid this risk materializing, being the event that creates the data we need?
Sorry, pardon for the background noise on my side. There's some construction work going on. Trying to understand the question. When you say current framework, which current framework are you relying on? Because anyway, in my mind, the data will grow, right? And it will improve over time, especially when the so what I mentioned earlier, the ISSB disclosure requirements and all that comes out. So we can expect once that happens, and as more and more jurisdictions align with the ISSB, or at least make it interoperable with what the ISSB is recommending, then there will be more data coming out as they either mandate for different types of entities within the economy. So the data situation will only improve over time, and I'm quite optimistic about that.
Thank you, Daniel. At this stage, we have no more questions. Kay wants to qualify the conference one. Or let's wait for a moment or two to see whether we can get more questions. Okay, there are no more questions. Guess this will conclude our discussion. Thank you very much for your attendance and your active participation. As I mentioned, the recording of this webinar will be available on our website shortly. And we're looking for, sorry, actually there is qualification of the conference rules. Does IAIS think stricter rules are required for AIGs?
So I can take that. I think it's too premature to say that just because you're an IAIG, that means you need stricter rules to manage climate risk. Many jurisdictions have already produced national level climate risk or environmental risk management guidance or requirements. So to the extent that the national rules apply to an existing IAIG, then already the expectations of supervisors are already out there. So I think that given that the conference rules have recently been introduced and still in the stage of being implemented in other jurisdictions, I'll be quite hesitant to say that we need additional conference rules specific to climate risk to add on to what the national jurisdictions are already doing. So you'll probably not be an immediate priority for the IAIS, and we'll closely monitor the evolving state of the supervisory landscape when it comes to climate risk management first.
Thank you, Daniel. So there are no more questions. So I think that with that, our webinar concludes. And again, thank you very much for everybody's active participation. And we're looking forward to your comments during the consultation period. And thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.